After 2 years of waiting for an official response, Judy Anderson watched as the National Action Plan was made public, but it brought her no closure.
With my sister, there are no leads, there's no clues.
She wants to know what happened to her sister, Shelley Mae Anderson, who disappeared in Northern Ontario more than a decade ago.
There are no investments that can bring back the lives lost or that can heal people's pain.
The Prime Minister seemed to acknowledge that, but says his government is trying to do better.
We're taking a step forward together to make the transformative change necessary.
The federal component of the action plan pledges to revitalize Indigenous languages, transform the delivery of health care, improve law enforcement training, and designate Indigenous policing an essential service. To pay for the promises, the government set aside more than $2 billion in the budget.
What reason does any Indigenous person in Canada have to trust the government?
The inquiry's chief commissioner says the commitments lack timelines and costing.
That document does not speak for me as a Nehewa woman and as a survivor.
Krista Shore was 12 years old when her mom was killed. The man who took Barbara Ann Shore's life was convicted, but not before police first blamed Shore's brother and father.
So if you ask me if police forces and RCMP should get more funds, no, they've been the big prominent piece of downplaying and constructing the violence Indigenous women and girls face.
But Shore says she finds strength in carrying the story of her mother's loss.
I'll continue to speak truth to power.
Okay, so Olivia, I guess the question here is, will we begin to see the results of this plan?
Well, Andrew, the government has already started work on some of these promises. For example, it's passed legislation to reform the child welfare system and protect Indigenous languages. But much of the work in the action plan will take longer, and the government is committing to annual progress reports. But for the people who continue to gather here at this memorial for Kamloops, laying shoes, toys, and flowers, that isn't good enough. They want action now. Andrew?
Okay, Olivia Stefanovich, thank you.
So let's bring in Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton. So Rosie, how significant is what happened today to the promise of reconciliation?
You know, it's a step forward. It's part of the overall process, but it comes after a pretty difficult week for the government where there have been questions raised about the government's commitment to reconciliation and the speed at which it's happening. It can certainly point to this plan to make the case that it's committed to doing the work necessary now and into the future. But what happened this week in Kamloops, Adrienne, really seemed to focus the public's mind on truth and reconciliation, on holding the government to account for promises made. The Liberals may have also set expectations just too high, given the complexity of some of these issues, like improving First Nations policing, eliminating racism in the healthcare system, for instance.
And so what about the potential political fallout? They are surely thinking along those lines.
For sure, because the Prime Minister has said this is the most important relationship for him, for the government, for the country. A lot of people voted for this government to support these goals. Remember, there was a record turnout of Indigenous voters in 2015 that brought the Liberals a majority in part. So progress is going to need to be better explained. Confidence that the government is making progress is going to be vital for those voters. We're going to talk about all of that coming up on At Issue.
All right, it's important. Rosie, thank you.
Thanks.